remain standing for an opening prayer.
Shall we pray? Eternal God, we acknowledge your divine presence here tonight at this town hall meeting at El Dorado West Secondary School. As we continue to engage the public in our national conversation on education, on matters relating to the 2023-2027 education policy. I ask your blessings on everyone in attendance and those watching us live on TTT and via the MOE social media pages. Almighty God, I ask your blessings on our ministers of education in attendance, Julian, members of the MOE executive team, and all of our education stakeholders who are responsible for this process. We pray that the contributions from citizens at this town hall meeting tonight will help to shape an education policy that is relevant to the needs of our students, one that promotes quality education, which will contribute to the development of Trinidad and Tobago. Amen.
You may have your seats. Dr. the Honorable Nian Gadsby Dolly, Minister of Education, the Honorable Lisa Morris Julian, Minister in the Ministry of Education, Dr. Peter Smith, Chief Education Officer, Mr. Aaron Ranratan, Director School Supervision, Ms. Carol Bagwandin, Director Early Childhood Care and Education, Dr. Ayinka Nurse Carrington, Manager Student Support Services Division, other heads of division of the Ministry of Education, our moderator for this evening's forum, Mr. Chris Metivier, School Supervisor to St. George East District, and all other supervisors represented here this evening. Our host principal, Ms. Anne-Marie Prasad Singh, principal of El Dorado West, and she will come and call it El Dorado Best when she comes out. The vice principal, teachers, administrators, parents, teachers, staff of the MOE, stakeholders in the education system, our viewers on TTT, our online stream on TTT Live Online, and our MOE Facebook page, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Nice to see you this evening. We will get straight into the program because I know you are very anxious for this evening's conversation, and I invite our host principal, Mrs. Anne-Marie Prasad Singh, to greet you this afternoon. Please welcome her to the lectern with a round of applause.
Dr. the Honorable Nian Gadsby Dolly, Minister of Education, the Honorable Lisa Morris Julian, Minister in the Ministry of Education, Dr. Peter Smith, Chief Education Officer, Ministry of Education, Mr. Aaron Ramratan, Director of School Supervision, Ms. Carol Bagwandin, Director Early Childhood Care and Education, Dr. Yainka Nurse Carrington, Manager Student Support Services Division, other heads of divisions of the Ministry of Education, our moderator for this evening, Mr. Chris Metivier, School Supervisor to St. George East Education District, and other school supervisors present, Vice Principal, teachers, administrators, parents and students, staff of the Ministry of Education, stakeholders in education, viewers on TTT, online on TTT Live Online and MOE Facebook page, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am very, very thrilled this evening to be the host school for this very important and meaningful exercise of educational reform and transformation of the educational landscape of Trinidad and Tobago. It is my esteemed honor as principal to welcome you to El Dorado West, El Dorado Best, El Dorado Gold Secondary School. We have used the legend of El Dorado, the search for gold, to teach all our students why settle for silver when there's gold inside of you. Our educational policy 2023 to 2027 speaks of this excellence in education. We believe every child has the right to be given the chance to excel. We hinge our expectations on the premise that the child must develop not only academically, but socially and emotionally. We believe children must learn how to live together in this culturally diverse nation of ours, Trinidad and Tobago. We must build every child's self-esteem, their critical thinking, and their cultural awareness. It is only when we help students appreciate themselves and by extension their society through knowledge, values, and skill will we really become that ideal Trinidad and Tobago. El Dorado Gold is heralded for its robust and rigorous clubs versus gang approach to education. We inundate our students with positive activities which create a happy school where children seldom stay at home. We have, since 2014, been voted aesthetically the most beautiful, well-kept school, government at that, in Trinidad and Tobago. We boast of over 35 clubs, including Dragon Boat, Astronomy, Science Club, including innumerable sporting activities. Not to mention, we are the only school in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean with a NASA program. We don't settle for the ordinary. We teach our children to set goals and standards of extraordinary. This has contributed significantly to build the self-esteem, the emotional intelligence, and cultural awareness of our students. They are given the opportunity to use the values, knowledge, and skills they acquire to improve their conflict resolution and cultural awareness. This is what education must do for our students. It must benefit them. It must give them a vision, a purpose, and a plan. And this, I believe, is the vision of the Human Resource Development Strategies Action Plan 2030. Education must be inclusive. Education must be relevant. Education must offer quality to all our students. In the long run, these are the building blocks which will act as a catalyst for social change and transformation of a progressive society and a disciplined workforce. I thank you. Welcome to El Dorado Best.
I think we need to give El Dorado West another round of applause. We now get immediately into the program as I invite the Honorable Minister to give her presentation. Please welcome her to center stage.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you. The protocols have been well established, so I will not re-engage them, except to say that I'm happy to have you here, and to those of you who are viewing us on TTT and on our live stream, it's a pleasure to have you. I am just going to spend a couple minutes speaking to you about the reason we are here, to discuss the Education Policy 2023 to 27 and some of the accompanying 2023 to 27 follows on the policy that would have expired in 2022. So the first question, what's our why? Which is another way, I guess the more modern way of saying, what's our purpose at the Ministry of Education? And for this, we go back to the inception of our nation. On August 30th, 1962, just before we became an independent nation, Dr. Eric Williams, our first Prime Minister, met with our young people, and that is significant. He chose to speak to them as we and is even more relevant today. And it is something that we must hold before ourselves, our children, at all times as we consider the purpose of education. And I'm going to read it, though it's on the screen, because it is so significant. The nation is on the march. There is no turning back. Your responsibility, and he's speaking to young people, your responsibility, therefore, is a very heavy one. If you fail, you jeopardize our nation. I have given to our nation, as its watchwords, discipline, tolerance, and production. They apply to you, the young people. To your tender and loving hands, the future of this nation is entrusted. On your scholastic development, the salvation of the nation is dependent. You carry the future of Trinidad and Tobago in your school bags. So with that context, in 2023, why do we do what we do? All of us, everyone involved in any aspect of the education sector should have one goal, and I believe we have one goal, and that is the scholastic development of our young people, therefore securing the future of Trinidad and Tobago. The scholastic development of our young people, thereby securing the future of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is the big picture of education. This is what we are educating for. This is why we invest, on average, 9 to 10% of our annual national budget into education. Bearing that in mind, our educational successes, our greatest educational successes, will only come when we pull together in the same direction. And I love the tug-of-war example because it gives you a practical understanding of what we are doing. We are pulling against the odds, and we are pulling in one direction for an outcome. And if you have ever done tug-of-war, you would know that there's always somebody leading the team telling you how to put your foot, where to put your hands, how to interlock, how to lean. And it's because we have to work together synergistically to achieve the outcome that we want. What's the role of the education policy in all of this? The education policy is a critical document. It tells us collectively our vision for education. It tells us the goals that go along with achieving that vision, the strategies that we have to implement to achieve those goals, and the key indicators of success. So the policy lays out for us our roadmap as we progress in the education sector. And therefore, it must align with an overall development strategy for Trinidad and Tobago, because that is what we are feeding into in the education sector. So if we look at the overall developmental agenda of Trinidad and Tobago, which is called Vision 2030, there is a role for education that is outlined there. And that role is that Trinidad and Tobago will have a modern, relevant education and training system. And it goes further to speak to what that relevance means. It means that we will instill certain positive values and behaviors into our citizens that will allow us to build a progressive society, because the hands and feet of this nation are our citizens. And if our citizens are not progressive, our nation will not be progressive. So this is what Vision 2030 says. And therefore, as we in the Ministry of Education and the entire education sector align ourselves with that vision, here's our vision of this policy, Education Policy 2023 to 27. And it is simple. It is simple because we want everyone to memorize and internalize it, to provide modern, relevant, quality, equitable education to all. Simple, And if you remember nothing else, it's the modern, relevant, quality, equitable. Because we believe that as we live this vision throughout everything we do, we will contribute to the wider development of Trinidad and Tobago. So our policy is a strategic roadmap. It says what strategies we are going to employ, and it tells us where we want to go. And it includes that vision. And this would have come out of a three-phase consultation process. So in 2020, we came to you, the public, and we spoke about what we wanted to achieve in education, and we listened to you as you spoke to us about how you saw education developing in Trinidad and Tobago. In 2021, we refined all of those comments, and we came back to you in a consultative mode, and we said, based on what you have told us, this is where we think you are telling us you want to go. And we received further comments on that. And then we took all of that into the pot, along with the comments of our education stakeholders, our parents, our teachers. And we have now condensed all of this into our education policy 2023-27. And we are here today for a conversation with you about what that looks like, how it is to be rolled out, and again, to get from you any recommendations and feedback, because a policy is written, but it's not cast in stone. There's always room for us to see how it is progressing and to make changes as we go along the pathway. So in its implementation stage, which is 2023 to 27, we have that room, that flexibility, and so we keep this conversation ongoing. There are 8 strategic areas of our education policy. Amendment of the Education Act, human resource development, equity in quality education, curriculum reform, revitalization of TVET, some of you may know it as TechVoc, but it refers to the technical and vocational training, harnessing ICT for digital transformation, transitioning learners through our education system, and enabling student success. Let's look at these 8 broad strategic areas, their goals, and the objectives under each of these goals. Amendment of the Education Act, and that has to do with the fact that our legislative framework needs to be updated. And so there are things that need to be added and things that need to be amended. For example, the ECCE sector, that entire sector is not mentioned in the Act. That needs to be changed. So that's an amendment we need to make. We need to speak about homeschooling. We also need to deal with student truancy. And student truancy is something that is in the Act. However, we need to change what it says about that. So these are some of the changes and the inclusions that we have to make when we speak about amendment of the Education Act. Our second strategic area, human resource development, extremely important. We are speaking about transformation. And if we are speaking about transformation, we are speaking about transforming the behaviors, the attitudes of the persons, the humans that make up the education sector. Because the buildings are not what we are trying to change. It's the humans and human behavior. So therefore, we have to concentrate on human resource development, not simply of our teachers and our principals, our non-teaching staff that you see in the schools and our students. That's the front-facing end of the ministry. But there's also a huge support end at the back of the ministry, and this would be our IT department, our communications department, our legal department. These persons also need to move and transform along with the ministry as it transforms. Because if they do not move along, then they will not be able to support the front-facing parts of the ministry in the way that we expect, and we will not get the results. So this area doesn't speak only to teachers and principals and so on. It speaks to the entire Ministry of Education, our school supervisors, curriculum officers, guidance counselors, school social workers, staff in all departments of the head office and our district offices. So it speaks to our teachers, it speaks to digitalization, and although this is a separate pillar, this is a cross-cutting theme about how we deal with our teacher records, and so on. All of this is part of human resource development and the improvement in staff performance. Equity in quality education, an extremely important area. This area is where we deal with the institution itself, the school. This is where we aim to ensure that the school is poised to offer to any student that enters its gates high-quality education. So it speaks to infrastructural development. It speaks to assessing the education at the schools. And that is through, of course, our Trinidad and Tobago learning assessment. That's where we used to call it the national test. We sample what's happening at our schools, and we see if the quality of education being offered or being uptaken by our children is what we expect. And so equity and quality education ensures that once you go to any school in this country, you can achieve a high-quality education. Curriculum reform, a big area, because this is where we have a lot of national conversation about what our students should be learning, what our students should be gaining when they go to school. Because everyone understands that our education, the foundation of our education, is to create the ideal Trinidad and Tobago citizen. That's what we are trying to do. Not just somebody who has certificates, but someone who has the values, attitudes, and behaviors that will give us the progressive Trinidad and Tobago we want. Somebody who has morals, ethics. That's what we are trying to create. And this is where we deal with it. Because we look here at our 21st century skills, the digital skills of students that we expect that we would train them in as we release them into the workforce. This is where we look at the patriotism, where we look at children and students who love their country and who understand that they want to work to make their country better. All of that is bound up in the curriculum reform section that makes up a part of the education policy. Revitalization of TVET. And this, again, has been a hot topic on the national agenda for years. And so it is here represented as one of the priorities. Why? Because we understand the skills and also the values that TVET education imparts to our students. So here we are speaking about revitalizing it, streamlining it, having that partnership with our post-secondary institutions. So we have MIC, we have YTEP, we have NESC, strengthening the relationship of those post-secondary institutions with our secondary schools so that we can get that close relationship so our students who are skills-based can proceed along that line without an issue. And so revitalizing TVET is a big part of what we want to do as we move forward. Digital transformation. This, again, is a separate pillar, but it is across the board and it cuts across every one of the themes. Why? If we learned nothing from COVID, we must have learned that we have to move forward digitally. If we were not ready to move, at least in some regard, we would have been a lot worse off than we were during the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. So digital transformation is a critical one, and it speaks to how we deliver education, yes, in the classrooms, but it also speaks about how we do the back-end support for our schools via digital methods. For example, teacher files. Teacher records, that's a big issue, because if teacher records are inaccurate, or as you know, sometimes they say we lose files, that causes a lot of problems for our teachers. And if our teachers are not feeling happy, then that would have a repercussion on what happens in the classroom. But to correct that inefficiency, we have to move to digital teacher files, and that's a project that's ongoing now. So a part of what's happening and being presented here, quite a few of these initiatives are already ongoing, and you would have seen the ministry launch our digital transformation program. So that's just a snapshot of what needs to happen, and there are quite a few projects ongoing with the digital transformation. Transition of learners through the education system. As we know, we are blessed in Trinidad and Tobago to have quite a few post-secondary institutions as well as a tertiary level institution. We have UTT, we have UE, and we have the ones I called before that our citizens can take part in so that they can maximize their educational journey. However, what do we notice? Quite a few of our young people do not make it through the secondary system, do not get into these post-secondary institutions, and therefore they do not get the best of what Trinidad and Tobago is investing in for their benefit. So we have recognized that an important part of what we are doing at the ministry and what we intend to do in the coming years is to make those articulation arrangements clear to our learners, make it easy for them to understand. They're going from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, and where we need to support that to do so, to encourage more input by our business associations into our schools so that our students understand the relationship between the education they are gaining and what they can do in their later life in terms of study or even work. So that transition will be smoother and our students will benefit from that. So that's another pillar that we are working towards. And our last one in terms of the large strategic area is enabling student success. This strategic area and this goal deals with the student themselves. Whereas equity and quality education dealt with the institution, we recognize that you may have an institution that is primed to offer high quality education. However, if a student has issues, they may not be able to take advantage of that. And so this pillar, enabling student success, speaks to how we identify what is required by our individual students. So no matter what their difficulties, their challenges, they can succeed within the education sector. So in terms of how we implement the policy has 8 strategic areas. And each of these strategic areas has a strategic goal. Each of these goals have a number of strategic objectives, and you would have seen that on the previous slides. And each of these objectives have policy directions. And these are very granular objectives under the strategic objective that the ministry is working towards achieving. So you would see those if you have gotten the chance to look at our policy that's on our website. And let me say this, the policy is on our website, and we want you to take advantage of looking at it, reading it, and internalizing what you see there. You would see these policy directions. Under the policy directions now comes sub-policy development, and that is critical. And we'll spend a little time on that because sub-policy development is where we deal with smaller, specific areas, and we outline what we are doing in those areas. And that is important because if we do not, education is very broad. The ministry is extremely wide. And so when we are dealing with important areas, it's good for us to pull those areas out into sub-policies and say exactly what we are doing, how we are doing it, and what we intend to achieve. And what that guards against is everyone interpreting what we should do in their own way. Because none of us is in any position forever. And when we leave, we want to ensure that the gains we have made are not lost by persons simply changing personality. We want to ensure that what we are doing, we keep building on it. And the best way to do that is to have a policy so you know what you are doing. And even if someone replaces you and has to make changes, it is against a background of what has been done and what is measurable. And a policy also outlines what are your key performance indicators, so you know if you're succeeding, if you're not succeeding, and if you have to change anything. So policy and sub-policy direction and development is extremely important. And from your sub-policy comes your implementation plan. So this is how we take the big strategic areas and break them down into the granular details of what happens on any particular school day in any particular school, and how we translate what happens in the school back to what we are intending to happen as we transform the education sector. So there are some sub-policies that have recently been developed. There are some sub-policies that are existing long before, because as I told you, this education policy 2023 to 27 is not the first one. This is the one that now continues from the education policy which expired in 2022. So the inclusive education policy, that's an existing sub-policy. The National School Code of Conduct, again, that discipline matrix is one that exists. The National Hair Code, that's a very recent addition that came in. And along with this education policy as well comes some new sub-policies. The Cultural Transformation Policy, that's the newest one we would have added. The Patriotism Policy, Homeschooling Policy, the Policy for the Registration of Private Schools, Digital Transformation Policy, the Remedial Education Policy. And we're going to just look at, very quickly, 4 of these. Because 4 of these new sub-policies directly impact school operation. And so it's important for parents, for teachers, for everyone to be on board with these 4 sub-policies. Again, these are available on our website, so we encourage you, go to the ministry's website, take a look at the education policy, that's the overarching policy, and take a look at the sub-policies as we buy into these things together, as we have conversations on what's happening, and as we get the feedback that will allow us to know if we are improving, if we are not improving, what are our successes, what are our challenges, what are things we have to continue with, and what are things we want to adjust along the way. So the patriotism sub-policy, the digital transformation sub-policy, the remedial education sub-policy, and the cultural transformation through education sub-policy. These are 4 critical ones that will affect the granular operations of schools as we move throughout the implementation period of this policy. The goals of the patriotism sub-policy. This is where we want to build the nationalism in our young people. This is where we want them to love Trinidad and Tobago, where we want them to have cultural confidence, where we want them to understand that they want to work for the betterment of Trinidad and Tobago. So not only using local curriculum content and examples, but field trips to important places, learning about important people. This is the sub-policy that deals with that. Even something as fundamental as singing the anthem every day and reciting the national pledge. You may say to yourself, why do we need to put that into a policy? It is because over time, things change, people change, and sometimes some of the things that were always happening are no longer happening. I'll put it that way. So we have to say now, do these things. You must do these things because we are losing the good, positive effects of our children participating in these types of activities. So the patriotism sub-policy deals with that, and we encourage you to go to the website and take a look at that. The digital transformation sub-policy. You would have seen the ministry already engaged in many of the initiatives that fall under the digital transformation sub-policy. You would have seen us, of course, doing the fundamentals, delivering devices, over 71,000 to our students. But you would have also seen us establish the Educational Technology Department of the Ministry of Education. And this is the first time we've ever had one. And that's a major pillar in the digital transformation sub-policy. You also would have seen, and principals would know, that we are working on the school management system, where we are getting all of the student data and the school data to transform the student records and the school records to a digital format that we can use that information in a very powerful way. Just imagine if the ministry has access to all of the schools' end-of-term examinations, what we could do with that information by running a report, which is very easily done because it's on a digital format, and we can see which are the schools that are having issues, We can even go down to the granular level of which students are having issues. We can look at geographic correlations. So there's a lot to be done if we have data in digital form, but it takes work to get there. And so this digital transformation sub-policy speaks about the school management system as one of the projects that we are undertaking. Also, the school learning management system. And you would have seen us speaking about that, and principals again know that we have been requesting information and putting information online so that we can have organized e-classrooms for all of our schools. So that if there is ever an instance where students have to stay away from school and teachers have to teach online, there's a system that they can go on, that the ministry will have control over, that has all of the information and all of the organization at their fingertips. These are some of the projects that are already in implementation stage from the digital transformation sub-policy. The remedial education sub-policy, again, one that the nation knows we are already engaged in. Why? You would have seen the vacation revision program last year for secondary schools, this year for both primary and secondary schools, after-school classes instituted in over 80 of our primary schools, and you would have heard us speaking since last year about our 106 schools of focus, 26 secondary schools, 80 primary schools that we are working on, that we have assigned school social workers and guidance counselors to be dedicated in, that we have assigned learning support assistants. So again, the remedial education sub-policy, one that is ongoing, and it's a critical part of the implementation stage of the education policy 2023 to 27. The cultural transformation sub-policy, very important. This is where we are looking at the type of citizen we are creating. This is a sub-policy that's being implemented over the course of 2 years. It started in this academic year, and it will continue into the next academic year. This is where we are speaking to the inculcation of values, attitudes, and behaviors that will allow our children to develop into ideal Trinidad and Tobago citizens. This is where we are speaking about curricular changes that will allow us to spend more time on values education. Because if we don't do that, then we will end up with the same result we have now. If you follow the crime symposium, the regional crime symposium that took place in Trinidad and Tobago, you would have heard every single prime minister speak to the fact that we have a problem with the citizens we are creating. That is not the academics that is the issue so much, but it is the type of citizen and why they're resorting to violence as the first option, and why they are going as far as they are, and why they seem to have no empathy and no sympathy, and why we are experiencing high levels of corruption as well. And this area, this sub-policy speaks to what we do every day in the classroom to assist our students in developing those character traits, developing their character. This is where we deal with it. And so some of the things you would see under this sub-policy is the introduction of mandatory activities at schools. So we have said to principals, you must have a school garden, no matter how humble it is. It doesn't have to be a whole hydroponic system if you don't have that. It could be a couple plants. However, there are important lessons our students learn from that. Not the least would be to eat what they grow. And that's an important lesson because we're speaking about food sustainability and reducing the import bill. So it comes from somewhere, and that's where the education sector comes in to allow our students to internalize these principles so that they grow up with this type of behavior and value. So we say to our schools, you must have a sports day. Again, no matter how humble. If you can't afford to buy medals and trophies for everyone, what else can we do to give them the experience of working together in a team to pull a little rope and play a tug of war? What else can we do to allow our students to understand that physical exercise is important and to focus on that? So there are different activities, and I've mentioned two, that have been introduced to the schools as mandatory from this academic year. And next academic year, there'll be other curricular changes that allow us to spend time on character development. And this is critical in our nation at this time. What are the indicators of success? Increased school performance goes without saying. Our children doing better and our schools performing better. And we can test how our schools are doing by the National Learning Assessments. Increase in student performance at SEAs, CSEC, and CAPE. That again gives us a snapshot of whether our students are doing better, and therefore it tells us that we are succeeding, because that's what we want for our students. A decrease in student infractions. All of us very concerned by our students if we see them misbehaving, fighting, and we want to see that decrease. So a lot of the things that we are putting in place, including the restorative practices pilot that is ongoing in 11 schools as a part of the remedial education sub-policy, all of that is aimed at decreasing student infractions, helping our students, giving them tools to deal with conflict and challenges in a positive way. Decrease in student attrition. As you may or may not know, the compulsory age of education goes up to age 16. So therefore, any student in school above that age has the option to leave school, and it's not against the law. So we don't want our students to leave. We want them to stay in school and transition through the education system. That's why that pillar is important for us. And therefore, if we see a decrease in attrition, we will know that our policy is on the right track. Increase in parent, student, and teacher engagement. That's the triangle. That's the triangle, and we want to see that triangle working better in our schools. Increased job satisfaction for teachers, principals, and non-teaching staff. That's the front end of the ministry. That's our hands and feet. And if they are having difficulties, then we are all having difficulties. And we want to see that happiness and the morale of our teaching and administrative staff increase. And of course, with all of this comes the wider benefits to the country of a better educated and a more competitively educated Trinidad and Tobago citizen. So we are asking everyone to get involved. How? By simply, if that's all you want to do, go onto our website and take a look at the policies that are there. Explore the policy goals, engage with us. We have this entire week that we are conversing with the public, and you can also drop messages on our Facebook page. Engage with us during this time and stay informed. Follow the Ministry of Education on our Facebook or our Instagram. Follow us and see what we are doing. And you can always have your say. We have a very responsive communications department who will be looking and is always looking at what messages come across and giving us feedback as to if there are any issues in education at this time. Now, with all of this said, we have to face the reality of implementation, and we have to manage the expectations. The policy is given over a period, 2023 to 27, and that's for a reason. Implementation takes time. What we are attempting to do is change behavior, change mindsets, change people. That does not happen instantly, and we understand and recognize that. Perfection will not be achieved in a day, if we achieve it at all, because we'll always be striving to do better and to be better. So the transformation we are speaking about, we are looking at a 5 to 7 year period for that to really take root. However, along the way we have goals, and therefore the achievement of these goals along the way will tell us that we are heading in the right direction. We want our students, we want our citizens to have those values, attitudes, and behaviors that are built in them. And that, again, takes time. We also recognize that to get the outcomes we want, we have to put certain things into the system. Ongoing professional development for our teachers or principals, classroom support, resources, a very big term. We met with our principals recently, and that was a buzzword. Where are the resources? And we must put those into the system. We must monitor. We must collect data. We must record, evaluate, run records. We must encourage our principals, our teachers, to develop professional learning communities that would support their development as they support and work with each other to implement the policy. Of course, infrastructural development of schools, a huge part. A lot of what we are speaking about here must depend on our schools being fully functional and operational, and that's a big part of it. So if we want to get the outcome of transformation, there are the inputs that we have to put, and to any extent that we are not putting in the resources and those inputs, we understand that it will affect the eventual outcome. Above all, as I close, the success of our education sector and of Trinidad and Tobago will be a function of how many hands come on deck. Education is everyone's business. And as a reminder, as I said before, all of us involved in this sector have one goal, and that is the scholastic development of our children. Because that is where the future of Trinidad and Tobago will be secured. That's our big picture. And again, our success will be the best when all of us lock hands, take the stance, lean back, and pull together in one direction. I thank you.
I think the Honorable Minister deserves another round of applause. I will tell you, this is the third time she's delivering the presentation, and with each time she gets better. So you know what those students are in for on Friday. So we move right into the part of the forum where we engage not only with the executive of the ministry, but we also have questions from the audience. We had a very, very exciting session yesterday, and I will invite the persons here, of course, to field your questions. The moderator will guide you accordingly. But as I look up at the signs on top of us, we see commitment, justice, discipline, teamwork, and respect. So I ask you to engage with the panel and with the moderator. He will manage the conversation. The team will have microphones in the audience. And I now invite the panel on stage. Joining the Honorable Minister on stage would be the Chief Education Officer, Dr. Peter Smith, the School Supervisor, Mr. Aaron Ramratan, Early Childhood Care and Education Director, Ms. Carol Bagwandin, Manager, Student Support Services Division, Dr. Yinka Nurse, and of course, our moderator, Mr. Chris Metivier, School Supervisor 2, St. George East. Please give them a round of applause. I want to do a little test. All of us would have been in school, primary, secondary. How many of us sang the national anthem in school? By a raise of hands. How many of us said the pledge? So you know how important it is for our children to do it. I now hand over to our moderator, Mr. Chris Metivier. Please welcome him and the panel to the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As the Chairman indicated, I am Chris Metivier, and I will be your moderator for this evening's proceedings. Permit me, please, to introduce our esteemed panel, who you would be interacting with this evening. Education Minister, Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gadsby-Dolly, Chief Education Officer, Dr. Peter Smith, Director of School Supervision and Management, Mr. Aaron Ramratan, Director, Early Childhood Care and Education, Ms. Carol Bagwandin, Manager of the Student Support Services Division, Dr. Ayinka Nurse Harrington. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel for this evening. Our very important stakeholders, the Ministry of Education welcomes you to this, our third meeting of our stakeholders. We engage you in a conversation this evening regarding the Education Policy 2023 to 2027. We at the Ministry of Education value all contributions and our interaction with you, the attending audience. We ask very kindly that when you make your contribution, you do so with the respect necessary to the members of the panel, and equally important, the members making other contributions in the audience. We would like to also engage as many contributions as possible. So we are asking that your contributions, your questions, your views, your concerns be very direct so that we can accommodate all. We appreciate your cooperation and we thank you. Stakeholders, may I crave your indulgence as I put a few questions to the panel, beginning with the Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, you would have articulated quite comprehensively the content of the Education Policy 2023-2027. My question to you, why an education policy at this time, and how did we get to this point?
Well, the first thing is that the Education Ministry has been for the most recent past guided by a policy. And the policy would have expired in 2022, the last policy. And the policy is important because it lays out how the ministry is going to proceed. And that's important information for the citizens of this country, whose taxpayers' dollars go into funding the Ministry of Education at about 10% of the national budget. So when we are spending or investing $5 billion, then it should be very clear to everyone how we are spending that money and what we are doing going forward with that funding, and therefore what we can expect, because the progress of Trinidad and Tobago will only be the progress of the education sector. So the policy is important, always important, because it is our guiding document and it constrains us to move the ministry forward. And at this time, especially, it was very important because COVID-19 was a real interrupter in the education sector. It showed up a lot of our weaknesses. It showed up a lot of the areas that we had to progress in. And therefore, this policy was particularly important at this time because it encapsulated all of the changes that we had to make based on the COVID-19 experience.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. My second question to the panel is a very topical homeschooling. This has engaged the national conversation for quite some time. The question is directed to the Chief Education Officer, Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith, why the need for a homeschooling policy? And what was the process we used to get to this point? Who did we consult? Who did we engage?
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Why a homeschooling policy? Well, if we were to look into the Education Act, one of the things you would see in Section 78 is some reference to homeschooling, albeit in one line. And so what the ministry recognized, especially coming out of COVID-19, almost on a monthly basis or weekly basis, there were dozens of applications for homeschooling for various reasons. And so the ministry, in an effort to ensure that we put in place a consistent process across the board, saw it fit to really roll out that homeschooling policy. In order to arrive at that policy, there was consultation. As you know, we would have had HAT, Homeschoolers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. We would have gotten comments also from the Catholic Education Board of Management, as well as tutor. We would have taken on board some of those recommendations. And let me say, very often, sometimes when we engage in consultations, the expectation is that once something is submitted, we would automatically use it. In some cases, yes, we are able to do so, but we are also bound by the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. So we operate within those parameters. Now, what we have seen recently would have been concerns with the policy. And let me state openly, we welcome some of those comments because it means that there is a need for us to perhaps take a second look at what we would have put out into the general public. And so if there are concerns with the policy and what we are asking members to do, to take some time to read the policy yourself. Read the policy in the context of the Education Act. If you have recommendations, if you want to submit suggestions, if you want to meet with the Ministry of Education, we are more than willing to meet. When we look at the Act, I must say the persons who put our Act together were visionary in some respects because they did see education evolving, and homeschooling represents that level of evolution. And we do recognize the need for us to really pay close attention to it. So if there are additional recommendations, suggestions, as I said before, the Ministry of Education is willing to meet with the various stakeholders to ensure that we have a policy that covers a range of options, not just simply a small minority, but a range of persons within our society.
Thank you very much,
Just
Dr.
add to that, because we had a concern raised last night as well with regards to the homeschooling policy and whether we felt it was too onerous and so on. So we would have looked at different policies existing around the world and in the region to come up with what we thought was a good fit for Trinidad and Tobago. Because we didn't have a policy before. This is different from the policy of education policy. We had an education policy before. This is our first foray into a homeschooling policy. And I want to make it clear. We are not trying to go, as the young people say, from 0 to 100. We are trying to put something in place that allows the minister, whoever the minister is, to fulfill their mandate, which is to ensure that all children are properly educated. That's in the Education Act. So in terms of looking at what we have produced, it's not a big stick either. And this is what I would have said to someone who commented last night. There's no intention that it has to be this way and we want it this way. We want something that works for Trinidad and Tobago. And we are not trying to be onerous, too onerous, but we have to operate within what the law mandates the minister to do. So within our responsibility. So, as the CEO said, if there are additional concerns, because he would have taken on board the comments of stakeholders that were submitted over the consultation period. If there are further questions, clarifications, recommendations, the ministry is open to that. We want a policy that works for us.
Reminds me of a statement I would have heard before. We are trying to ensure good teaching for every child, in every class, in every school, every day. Yes? My final question to the panel before we engage you, our very important stakeholders. Again, the very topical private school policy. The question is directed to Mrs. Bagwandine. Mrs. Bagwandine, why? How? Did we include Tobago in our consultation, Ms. Bagwandine?
Well, I must boast it was a very inclusive activity we engaged in the creation of this policy document. The policy document we started drafting in June of 2021. We met every 2 weeks with private providers or proprietors of private institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. During that time, persons were given the opportunity to air their concerns. A number of persons asked whether or not the Ministry of Education was going to shut them down. We alleviated all fears by ensuring them that no, we would allow you to continue operating. We're going to support you to reach quality standards. So from June 2021 to November 25th, 2022, we worked collaboratively with all stakeholders. We drafted this policy. The final drafting of the policy, which we now have for public dispensation, is where we speak of the moratorium. We are giving private providers a 3-year moratorium to ensure that their institution is meeting quality standards, making sure they have approval from WASA, Town and Country, Ministry of Health. We are dotting all our I's and crossing all our T's. We have also included that data collection, because we have over 600 private early childhood centers in Trinidad and Tobago. We have over 50 private primary schools. We have over 50 private secondary schools. But when it comes to providing data, that is where, or having the data, that is where we lack, and data informs how we operate. And we are not just creating the policy and leaving it there. We have implemented within that policy the monitoring and evaluation system, where we would be going out there. We are supporting you, the quality standards, making sure your facilities, you have the necessary resources, making sure you have the furniture. We are guiding the proprietors in ensuring that they have that safe, comfortable space. Also, making sure parents feel comfortable that my child is being educated, or my child's education is being supported by a well-qualified person. Before I wrap up, on October 10th to the 12th, we would be having 3 virtual town hall meetings where we are going to meet with providers. We are going to go through the documents once more with them. We're going to have representatives from the various agencies who are also going to be with them to support, to say, okay, the electrical inspectorate, we are visiting your center, or you don't have approval. Here is how we are going to support you in getting the approval. We have also modified the registration certificate, just like our driver's license or passport. We have an expiration date. It's the same way we are going to have with this new registration certificate, an expiry.
The opportunity now to engage the panel. So we
Hi, good night.
Good night,
To the panel, everybody. Just wanted to say I was real pleased that I saw the lady doing sign language, and that was something I really was interested in, that sign language is a very big part of the society, and you could start teaching sign language at least in the primary school level, because nobody didn't ask the born, therefore dumb. And I would like to interact with mute people. So I would like that, they take a brass approach against the sign language. And that was very nice. That's the first thing I saw, and that was very, very nice. And I wish I'd really start, make it mandatory, just like Spanish, make it mandatory that you learn sign language, right? Another thing, autism. I have a son who autistic, right? And in primary school, I didn't know he was autistic. As the teacher told me he was autistic, right? He's an adult now. So I didn't really know how to go about it to put him in a special ed school. Miss Carrington even told me that it have those schools. That child is 20 now, and I didn't know that. I didn't never know that, right? So I only aware that it have special ed school for autistic. All I ever heard about was Ishi's, right? That's the only school I ever heard about doing for special children, right? And as I say, Ms. Carrington made it wise that there is school, and I find it's not doing much for the autistic children because they can't even get into the workplace. It's hard to even get them into the workplace because, they're not moving as normal as other people. So you need to take a little better approach with autistic people and children, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if we could ask Dr. Nurse Carrington to just share a bit on, that topic of how the ministry supports children with special needs.
Good evening, everyone. So under the Student Support Services Division in the ministry, we have our special ed unit. And our special ed unit is charged with looking at the different interventions of our learners, our students. When we do something called a special needs assessment survey, where every year that survey is run, that teachers and principals are able to enter the survey and identify students that they think may have some sort of learning challenges. When we get that information, interventions are then in the process. So we have identified the students through the special needs survey, or we can have parents who, in their own observations of their children, they can then contact the school to say, this is what I observed at home with this child. Or they can even reach out to our Student Support Services Division, and they will give them that sort of information, and they will even consult with the parent as to the different observations the parent would have seen at the time. We move from there. You observe in the classroom, we have something called an SBIT team. So the teacher would observe the child not functioning, not reaching the learning curves, and they will bring that concern to our school-based intervention team, which have our student support services persons may sit on the team from time to time. If the interventions are mostly coming out of special ed, they would have our special ed instructor as part of that team, and there, that special ed teacher or instructor will then advise on strategies for that child. The teacher will then go back to the classroom, try to implement those strategies. If that is not working, then a formal referral is going to be made for student support services, and then a series of interventions and SNAP assessments will be done to help that student cope with learning along his or her educational journey. So it's a process, and we also have to give time for intervention, for observation. So if parents recognize that their children are not meeting certain learning curves, have a conversation with the teacher, go to the SSS, the personnel in your school, and they will then guide you as to how to navigate the different learning challenges and issues along the educational way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carrington.
Pleasant good night.
Good night.
I have two questions. One, how does this policy address violence and indiscipline in schools? Secondly, a lot of parents have real challenges, not only financial, but social, which affects the children and their ability to learn. Is this addressed in the policy? Thank you.
The first question was how violence, school violence.
How does this policy affect address violence and indiscipline in schools?
Okay. But I know Dr. Nurse Carrington just spoke, but I will give her a chance to speak in a little while about the restorative practices that have been piloted in 11 schools and that is ongoing now. And I will speak in a more general sense that the addressing of school violence comes under two areas, but the main area will be enabling student success. And we recognize that there are students coming from different backgrounds with different challenges, and some of them are unable to deal with conflict successfully. And they lash out, they resort to violence, and we see it playing out time and time again. Sometimes when you see these things happening and the video goes viral and you hear the story behind the situation with the particular child, you know, you understand, not that you condone, but you understand how challenged they are in terms of their response. So the restorative practices is a part of changing the behavior of our students and helping them to deal with conflict and challenges more successfully. So we are piloting at 11 schools and moving out into the other schools. We have 26 secondary schools of focus, schools where we recognize more resources are needed and we are putting them there. So the intention is to get this into all of those 26 and then further into our school network. But I'll ask Dr. Carrington to give a little more information about those restorative practices.
So when we think about restorative practices, we think about relationships, reintegration, repair, respect, rebuilding. And that is what this addition to the policy will do. We understand that there are frustrated students. We understand that teachers are also frustrated. Parents are frustrated with the different socioeconomic challenges that they have to face on their daily lives. Restorative practices give students a voice. It also gives teachers and administration a voice. We tend to not listen. And one of the components of restorative practices is built on what we call the respect model, which is built on the principles of values. And I see some of the models we can see featured in this school: commitment, justice, that we call a fair process. So over the last couple months, between May to July, we have trained over 400 persons in restorative practices. And I say practices because that is used in the school system. We are accustomed hearing about restorative justice that is used in the criminal justice system. So with restorative practices, we are rebuilding schools, we are rebuilding communities, we are rebuilding families, we are holding persons accountable. Accountability is one of the key areas in restorative practices. Students must understand that what they do, they need to be accountable, not just be suspended, but understand why you are suspended. You have hurt your friends, yes. You have also hurt your classmates. You have hurt your teacher. You have hurt your parents by doing your infraction. We give them also time for mindfulness. Restorative practices deals with a reflective process, encouraging students to reflect through the type of restorative language we are now encouraging in our schools. We encourage people to use I messages. I feel sad. I feel hurt. I feel frustrated, as opposed to avec. We're getting them to think, to stop, to listen. And this program is not a quick fix. It is a progressive thing. We need to have our restorative practitioners, as Honorable Minister said. We are using 11 schools to have these practitioners continue this type of progress in the schools. These practitioners are charged to do things like restorative circles. It's a good way to start the day. You get into the classroom as the teachers, you have 20 minutes with the students, and you ask them, okay, good morning, what are you grateful for this morning? And it's a powerful tool to get students speaking and we, the adults, listening. We also engage our 110 students, peer mediators, so that they are part of the restorative process. We're also going to be using something called restorative conferencing, where if a student commits an infraction, that student could also, apart from the parents, they can bring someone from their community that will speak positively on their behalf. Because even though we may see some of the negatives, those same students have some very strong qualities that they may not see, their parents may not see, their teachers may not see, but probably the pastor sees it. Probably the person who owns the shop sees it, and they can speak on their behalf. We are empowering students, we are empowering staff, we are also empowering our parents. We have to understand that the school is a community, and we are all a part of this community in building this community. Restorative practices have been used in Jamaica. They have been used in Australia. Guyana has a whole country policy on restorative justice. So we have to be committed to the process. We have to use it. And it's a life change. So you have to decide that I want to be a restorative type of person and use this process. And that's the only way we're going to see the success in our schools, with commitment and continuity.
Could you be reminded of the second question?
Thank you. A lot of parents have real challenges, not only financial but social, which affects the children and their ability to learn. Is this addressed in the policy? Thank you.
Well, I think Dr. Nurse Carrington just went through a lot of what we do, and just to indicate as well, this was a key determinant in the remedial education policy, where we put in those 106 schools learning support assistants to assist the principals in the administration, as well as their dedicated school social worker and guidance counselor, because we understand that these issues can carry them to the point where they are not learning. And so we needed dedicated support for these schools. Some of them need more than one, but we have at least put one school social worker, one guidance counselor in to address the issues in these schools. So yes, it's a big part of the remedial education policy that supports the national education policy.
Thank you, Madam Minister. The gentleman on the right.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Good evening, Minister. Good evening, CEO. Good evening, audience and esteemed guests. My name is Mr. Rodney Rajkumar. I am the president of the Homeschool Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to thank you all for your preemptive strike, because most likely I would have been asking the same question that you all would be answering. Now, our members are enraged, as you would have been following what you were seeing on Facebook and so on. And we would have sent out a release from the president yesterday via social media and our different platforms stating our position. Now, in a different capacity, I also train university lecturers to teach online and in a face-to-face setting. And I train the teachers that go into primary schools as well in different ways. You know, in fact, I actually approved the application of the CEO's son to come to university. So I was asked to do that. Now, I'm saying all this just to say that I am not new on the block. Now, my first question then lies in the whole consultative process. And I want to make it specific to that, since the question was answered very generally. Can the CEO describe its interactions with the Homeschool Association of Trinidad and Tobago in the consultative process? Or perhaps the minister would like to answer that. I don't know. Anyone?
Is that the end of the question? Could you ask your entire question and then we will...
That's the first question, because again, our members are awaiting an answer, because there were questions raised there. So if you can answer that, and then I'll move on to my second, please.
If I could just get the entire question,
Yes.
then I'll address it. So
Could
make
you
the entire contribution and I'll address
All right.
that.
Yes.
Sure,
thank
no
you.
problem. So we were presented with a completed homeschool policy, which was called a draft, and the then Chief Education Officer, not this chief education officer, the previous, called us to a meeting. And we were surprised because we were not consulted on the formation of this draft. And we took it to an international consultant, and he said, in his experience, this is among the worst that he has ever seen in the world. So therefore, we entered into consultations with the ministry. We asked them to postpone a meeting. They held 2 meetings with us, and then it was abandoned as far as we can understand. So if you could describe that process. The second thing is, yesterday I created a petition. Between yesterday and today, I have over 1,000 signatures of people who are saying, let us reject this homeschooling policy because it is undemocratic, in echoing what the young lady said yesterday. And there are reasons for that, because the legislation is contrary to the Constitution, which is higher than the legislation that is referenced in the policy. So I'd like you to tell our persons, our homeschooling community listening, because I tell them to listen on, whether or not the Ministry of Education is going to enter into new discussions with the Homeschool Association of Trinidad and Tobago, very specifically this time because it was general before, whether or not you're going to enter into discussions with us so that we can come together and form a homeschooling policy for the country. Because they are waiting, and they are saying they are waiting for their fingers to talk in the ballot ink, or we will come together, or we will come together and to launch a possible legal action against the ministry. And so they are waiting for answers. So the second question, let me make it short now, is, are you going to send us correspondence saying, can you please come in and let us continue the discussions that we started before? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rajkumar. And I would answer your questions by saying this. You presented one version of events. We may have another. But at the end of it, what we are saying as a ministry is that if there are additional concerns, more than was raised when the Homeschooling Association commented on the draft, and if there are other things you would like to discuss, the ministry is open to this, because we are making a policy for us and for Trinidad and Tobago. And in the formulation of the policy, the Homeschooling Association was our major stakeholder. And therefore, if you feel that there are other things you would like to add, having read the policy, which bears some of your stamp, because you did make comments on it, if there are additional things, we are open. This is not a fight, and we are not aiming to fight. We are aiming to regulate the industry in the way that is best for the children of Trinidad and Tobago. So I hope that you understand the position.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Members, important stakeholders. Yes, sir.
Oh, hi, good day. So I'm here with a number of hats. I'm with the El Dorado Gardens Community Group. We live walking distance from here. So we have a big community of kids that are really need to get up-to-date education. So it's 2 questions I have. One was, around this time, September last year, you made an announcement via TTT's Instagram speech about getting teachers to come out and come together and everything. And you listed a whole lot of different strategies, e-platforms, e-things, a lot of things. And none of that, not one thing, has been implemented. And
I don't know if I'm hearing you well. Around what? September of last year?
Yeah, last year, the day before school, the night before school opened. So that means all the parents, that means all the parents here, bought their books and everything that they needed for school.
Right.
And then you came on and said, teachers come out, you know, we knew what was going on with the teachers at the time, and we need to do all these things, and you listed off a whole plan of everything, e-platform, e-books, e-this, you know, lots of strategies. And I'm an entrepreneur as well. I'm a digital practitioner. So I know what it takes for digital transformation. And none of what you listed ever came out this school term past, the year that's gone. So now we have a new policy. And during the last year, I was able to launch a project called Tech for Agri 360, where we are using immersive media to support our children's learning. So you utilize it with a very affordable VR headset, and you put your phone in it, meaning that it's accessible. So everybody here has a phone. Everybody here can go on the internet and access immersive media. It's a powerful learning tool. It gets the kids excited. We've worked with Digital Foundation, and our partners are globally based. So we have like one of our main international partners is the International Federation of Agricultural Journalists. And we are simply using agriculture and STEM fields to really help as a learning tool. It helps the teachers, it helps the students, and it's easily adaptable because it pairs with your phone as it is right now in your purse, wherever your purse is. All right, so I'm wondering, well, the two questions are, who is going to monitor and evaluate this entire policy? It's very extensive. It has a lot of things in it. I've read it. It's 133 pages. And you sent it to us last week, Friday. And here we are today. I made sure to read it. But who is going to monitor and evaluate all of that? Like, you don't expect the ministry to do it because y'all are supposed to be implementing it. I don't know who implements policy in Trinidad, like who enforces policy. Like, I really have a problem with policy in itself. You'll say the word a lot, but who enforces it? It can't be y'all because y'all are administering it, right? So who is monitoring and evaluating it? And then the second question is, as an entrepreneur, there's a specific part in the policy that talks about bringing innovation and entrepreneurship into the classroom. There's entire sections on digital transformation. Here I am. I'm a known innovator, so I'm known to go on TV and talk about things that we're bringing out for youth and women and all these sorts of things. And as a digital practitioner, I know exactly what it takes to do that digital transformation. And I'm just not really seeing that because the ministry does not have digital expertise. You don't. Otherwise, we would have had an e-platform already. So if it is I am an entrepreneur and I have something that is readily adaptable and able to make impact now, even for those autistic persons, because I believe I have ADHD. I haven't been tested, but I believe I do. So we've already actually tested it with children who have these special needs, and it's a hit. And we've actually already engaged with your officials. So I don't want to fight, but I may have a little of the same issue as this gentleman because your officials saw the thing before we launched it at the Public Affairs Office of the U.S. Embassy. And they told us 2 weeks later, or how many other weeks later, that there is nothing that the ministry can do and that you all are only willing to work pro bono. As a small business, I can't have a livelihood that way. As a social entrepreneur, I do want a business, but I do want impact. I have nieces and nephews, and I must say, if you're talking equity in education, we have the tool for that, to start that off, to help and adapt. 1 second. To help and adapt with the digital transformation. So why are we being ignored? That's my question.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. I'm not sure at what point of the presentation you came in, but I think the question you may want to ask is, what is the status of the ebook implementation and what is the status of the e-classroom? And I think I mentioned that in my presentation, so it's good to reiterate that in order to do those things, what we did in 2021 was to establish the Educational Technology Department of the Ministry of Education. And that is the department that has been and is engaged in now creating the e-classroom platform, which is ongoing at this time. So when I spoke of it at the start of the term, I said that this is where we are heading, and that's exactly where we are. In addition to that, the ebook platform, we are collaborating with Ministry of Digital Transformation on that. So iGovTT has been the one that put out the tender. We had the responses, we've had the negotiations, and we are now at the point where we are ready to award the ebook platform. These things are not simply done by looking at what is in the landscape and saying, this is good, and we can just adapt that. There are procedures, there are processes, and certainly, if there is any service that the ministry has to engage, and your company is capable of providing it, you are free to tender for that. But it certainly is not a case where the ministry can just look at someone and say, I like what you're doing, we'll just pluck this out of the landscape. You would have seen procurement legislation being passed in this country, and it guards us against that. So certainly, if there's anything that you feel you can provide, you are free to tender for it. And I think, as I said, I've reiterated our progress made in those areas with the e-classroom, with the school management system, with the e-book platform, and we are moving along in these directions. Not immediate, and even as suitable as you feel your product may be, and you're right to toot your own horn on that aspect, it will not be immediate either. These things take time. We are building an e-classroom system for over 250,000 students across different schools. It's not easy, and it's not a simple solution. So it takes time, and we are continuing along the road. And that's why the policy has an implementation period. And that's why we are saying that the transformation we are looking for is not immediate. And so I'm glad to update you in that aspect. And in terms of monitoring and evaluation, we are called to account for our use of the government's funds in many ways. We account in the parliament at the budget time. We sit in front and are examined by the opposition in a standing finance committee. And at various times, we come out and we account to the country for what we do. Within the ministry, I can tell you as well, we are accountable to the cabinet for the work that we do as well. So there's no independent monitoring body for the Ministry of Education that resides within our country, whereas the CARICOM or the EU and different associations may have different organizations like the UN and so that do reports, and they come in, they gather data on the country and they do reports and so on. We are the one tasked with making our policies based on the national developmental agenda, and we are the ones tasked here, all of us as heads, with ensuring that our departments do what is required to implement our policies. And of course, it is easily examinable by the public because you see the changes that we say we are making being made bit by bit, incrementally along the way. So thank you for that, and it was a pleasure to update you on where we are with our digital transformation strategy. And again, anything you can offer to the ministry, feel free to tender for any service that we have offered.
Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Yes, good afternoon. Protocols observed, of course. Ronald Macano. Well, I'm caught up between a question that was just asked. So I'll try to keep in between what I deviate a bit. My question is also about when COVID happened, we were transformed from face-to-face into online learning. And a lot of things that were supposed to properly done, because I'm from an online background, right? Online teaching background. And a lot of things that, there was a lot of frustration, I guess, because on Monday we had to change what we were doing on Friday, face-to-face to online. And a lot of shortcuts to me took place, which was effective. It worked for what it was trying to solve. But a lot of the issues that I'm hearing coming up over the period in reading policy, etc., refers to a proper online learning system. And I wish that the committee and team takes seriously or properly the whole issue of the alternative and options to online, which is online, a properly designed system. And I'm hearing that based on what you're saying, the plans are for the ministry in that area. For instance, in online learning, artificial intelligence could identify weak students right? So the problem of weak students, whether they have medical deficiencies or whatever, artificial intelligence could tell you a student has learning challenges or learning preferences. So when you set up a response to that, you then have a personalized learning system that works with the student to get them to the other objectives you set out in your policy, which is success rates, attrition reductions, and all these other things. So what I'm saying is that even because the plan is 23 to 27, 2023 to 2027, so that's now, right? So,
if I may, could you direct the question or the concern?
Yeah, sure. The question is that an assessment, a proper assessment for online, does the same thing to make an effective outcome, which is student success, right? So I'm saying that whatever we create, we could patch fix some of the solutions, like even testing students for VAC inventories, whether they're visual learners, oral learners, read, write, kinesthetic. Those kind of things are advantages to the existing system. So it's just a suggestion, not really a question, right?
We do appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Yes.
Well taken. Well taken.
Permit me, please, stakeholders, to address the panel. Very important question to the Director of School Supervision. Will there be training, or has there been training for teachers to effect the goals of this policy, Director?
Thank you very much for that question. And the short answer to it is yes, and I'll go on to say what we have been doing so far. Training for teachers is very important with regards to the delivery of the school's curriculum. We have to ensure that the needs of our students are met. The required pedagogical skills for teachers, and with the new dispensation of the cultural transformation policy and how that is unfolded with the required school activities. Remediation has become very important recently from COVID to post-COVID, and we realize students would have had a lot of learning gaps. And we have to find a way to bridge that as quickly as possible. So we have exposed our teachers to remediation training recently, especially for the schools of focus, both at the primary and at the secondary level. So they were recently introduced to that level of remediation training to ensure that they can effectively meet the learning needs of our students. Even within our big framework of the cultural transformation policy, it speaks about an enhanced curriculum. An enhanced curriculum means that the curriculum will be adjusted. So the focus is not just on the academics alone, but also bringing into focus the morals, the TVET aspect of it, and the arts. All these areas can now be brought into a level of focus, just as the academics, to ensure that all our students get that balance and that educational opportunity for their own personal growth and enhancement. Even recently, and we are in the second year of it, the vacation revision program, and we would have focused again on students who really need to benefit from it. So we would have done it at the primary level, focusing on the standard 4s and 5 students, and also the Form 1 students who are transitioning into the secondary schools to ensure that they can be able to have that level of abilities that they need to work with the school's curriculum. Even at the secondary level, with the Form 1 and the Form 2 level, we have introduced the adapted curriculum, a level of flexibility, and to ensure that students will be well catered for. So again, the training of the teachers to go with the adapted curriculum to ensure that they meet a level of assessment where they can achieve through our Trinidad and Tobago National Learning Assessment. And even if they want to exit during the period from Form 1 to Form 5, they will have that level of certification. Even if they don't achieve the required CSEC level, they will still have that level of certification and be able to build on that, and be able to build on the CVQs and also the technical vocational training which we are emphasizing more now because we realize to really cater for students and the 21st century skills, we can really have that balance for all our students to find their level of career path. And again, it speaks about career development and career fairs, all of that part of the cultural transformation policy. So in a nutshell, it includes all of that.
Thank you very much, and it will be remiss of me if I do not ask this question. What should parents look forward to as we implement these policies? And what are the roles of parents in the implementation? Carol?
Okay, so as we implement the policies, we are talking about stronger parental engagement. Because, for example, in early childhood, we use the term, we don't accept a child, but we accept a family and we accept a community. Because the child is part of the family is part of the community. And families are gatekeepers of our system to make sure that, or keep us on track to ensure that we are providing the quality education that we are promising to provide. So you are going to see more family engagement as the policies are rolled out. Just as how we have our community engagement, it's the same way we're going to have family engagement. It is a supportive process. We are all walking side by side with each other. We are all accountable, and we are all coming together for that one common goal.
Thank you very much, Carol. We can take 2 more questions, maybe 3. Yes, ma'am?
Okay. Good night, everyone. Minister, I would like to say thank you. I would like to commend you and your team for educating us on your plans and the fact that the policy is open for changes or amendment or addition. I want to commend you for that. My area of concern is the area of the future of work. My name is Camille Salvom. I am the head of animation at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, but I am also representing the Lasaiva Village Council. And the reason why I mention that is that COVID had a huge impact on our community. And we are at the moment trying to rebuild that through a homework center. But I look at the young people in the village and I wonder how are they going to cope with the future of work, because we are going to lose, there are going to be jobs that are going to become obsolete, and there are jobs that are already obsolete. And those kind of things are still in the education system, and therefore an amendment in that space needs to happen to bring in things that are meaningful for the future of work. I want to touch on artificial intelligence. It's a sleeping giant. And as an educator, I think it's important that we don't look at it only as how it's impacting our children, but how it's impacting our teachers. I'm an educator, and I am having problems differentiating Mr. AI and the student in the room. It is a real thing. So it's not a question, but I would like to propose that this sleeping giant be addressed for the sake of the teachers that are dealing with it. It is going to, what will need to happen is the assessment that needs to change, because we cannot base assessment now on just creating words. You know, it's just not going to happen. So again, as I said, it's not a question, but it's simply to say that I would like some consideration to be made for the impact of artificial intelligence on our curriculum, and also what we teach our teachers for their own impact in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miss.
I think those are 2 very, very salient points that have been made. With regards to the future of work, that is why one of the mandatory activities that we have asked schools to implement every year would be a career fair. As simple as it is, it allows the school to bring in the types of professionals that can speak to new and emerging careers and it allows the students to make that link between what they are doing in terms of the education they are trying to achieve and where they're intending to go. Because you're very correct. Without that, some students do not have an understanding of the breadth of careers that are available, and they may feel very stymied, especially if they haven't made up their mind to be the standard doctor, lawyer, teacher, etc. So you're very correct there. In terms of the AI, again, what the AI has done is made easier the access to not just information, but even to phraseology, words, and so on. So you're right. Our teachers have to adapt in terms of how they set assessments and what they are actually testing, the deep learning and the deep understanding of concepts and so on. I have used the AI before. It's a valuable tool that can be used, but what is also an emerging part of the literature speaks to the fact that in some disciplines, the AI is able to give you useful information. In some disciplines, it's a lot more difficult. So our teachers really must, and this is where the interaction between the ministry and the training institutions is important, because even in teacher training, some of these things must be included so that our teachers keep modern, because if we are going to be touting modern education, we have to keep them relevant with what's happening. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Can we take 2 more questions or concerns?
Hi.
Yes, sir.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for taking this time to speak to us. I am coming from a perspective of a Christian, right? Noting that we have particular, are you hearing me?
Of a Christian, you said?
Yes, as a Christian perspective. Noting that we have particular values, all right? We have particular values of, even that would extend to what we would do for our children, even as to where salvation would come from, that would be different from the Dr. Eric Williams quote in terms of the scholastic development of our youth. And if we are not using education for that purpose, and then this is the purpose for which this is being presented in this national education policy, and we have other differing values, and then there are others that are not Christians that also have different values, how can this education policy, why would this education policy be advanced even on those who would, in a sense, divest from the traditional system to go to private schooling or to homeschooling for religious reasons? And are such persons, what action is going to be taken to view, okay, to deal with this equity? If equity is not what those who divest for those types of religious regions trying to hold our values there, if that's not what those of us that are holding those values, if that's not what we want, is that going to be imposed on us? That's my main.
What's going to be imposed on us?
In terms of the education policy and the values, for instance, you guys want to advance quality education. What if I have a different view on that? What if other Christians or other people have a different view as to what would constitute quality education?
In the policy itself, you would see under equity and quality education, it deals with all school institutions and so, and it's under the area, there's a goal, there are policy directions under each of the objectives that give a very clear picture of what we are speaking to in terms of quality education. And it doesn't have anything to do with infringing on religious values. As you know, the government supports different religions, freedom of religion. We have schools that execute their religious practices as a part of the education system, and the denominational boards are a big part of our stakeholders, and we have not had any negative interaction in that respect, nor is it intended that we would. In terms of quality education, we have broken it down in the policy, what we are speaking about, and it's common core values. Look, we have some here: commitment, justice, respect, discipline, teamwork. These are really cross-cutting positive values, so it's nothing to do with the individual or intimate religious values. Religious liberty is a part of our law in Trinidad and Tobago, and there's nothing in this policy that is intended to infringe that. Nothing at all.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Our final question. Yes, ma'am.
Can we just take, sorry, after this one, we just have one
more?
hand, the lady with the hijab. Could you all just stand and that would be our final,
Okay.
right? Seeing that they already had their hands up. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Pleasant good night to all. All protocols may be observed. Madam Minister, I am going into the education policy where I am part of, where I was part of in the year 1962. To enter a college from a rural district. I was part of Dr. Williams' speech about my book bag. Rural district, I was even taught to respect our national flag, our pledges, and everything. Madam Minister, I'm very happy that you all are going back into that, because somewhere along the line we lost it. And further, I went to the public sector. Yes, I listened, and I was educated under your educational system. And in so doing, as a good citizen, I ensure that my children remember that is not what your country could do for you, but what you could do for your country. Thank you to the education system. I wish you all the best. As a senior citizen now, I'm very proud. I know we had ups and downs. In every lifestyle, there must be ups and downs. So, Madam Minister, and whoever to come, thank you for the policy that you all are bringing back to respect national flag, national emblems, and the pledge. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Pleasant good night to the Honorable Minister. Good night to the panel. Special recognition to Ms. Prasad Singh, the Principal of Dorado West, and to her VPs, Ms. White Clark and Ms. Jordan Pereira. In terms of the legislative framework, we know that all students must be educated. What I want to know is, has the legislative framework been amended to include the education of non-nationals? And if so, to what extent? Does it extend to all non-nationals or just those who have been registered? The reason for the question is, educators will know that students who fall between the cracks, as they like to say, tend to form part of the deviant group in society. And we would like to avoid such a thing from happening with these non-nationals. Thank you.
There has been and there is a mechanism by which non-nationals can enter our education system, and it's clearly laid out in the Immigration Act. So there are certain things they have to get a student permit and so on. So that is not requiring an amendment. If you're speaking about the migrants, are you? Okay, so the migrants, they have a different consideration, and that situation arose, it's not a part of the usual way in which foreign nationals get into our education system. So that is why we, as the Ministry of Education now, we are awaiting the legal framework from the AG's office to allow us to legally have migrants enter our schools. So that will be separate and apart from the usual structure that already exists for non-nationals to get into schools.
Okay, thank you very much. This segment, are we taking any questions?
Yeah, two. Yeah, let's have these two.
Okay, two final questions.
Two final and that's.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. You're hearing me? Is this
Yes.
better? Okay, good. So good evening, everyone. Good evening, Minister. Good evening, Minister Julian. Good evening, CEO, members of the education team. My name is Fiona Rajkumar, and I am the Corporate Secretary of the Homeschool Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm going to just, because I want to be brief, I have a suggestion for the ministry. Coming out of COVID, as the CEO quite rightly mentioned, a number of parents felt that they wanted to homeschool. And so from our end as the Homeschool Association of Trinidad and Tobago, we got an onslaught of requests as well. And so what I would want to suggest, because in speaking to parents and advising parents, it was more that not that parents wanted to homeschool, it was that parents were highly concerned about the health and the well-being of their children. And so they felt to be able to protect their children from COVID and sending them back out into an environment they felt they were unsafe in, that homeschooling was the way to do it. And so I had to share with parents, no, you don't really want to homeschool. What you want to do is protect your child. So what you may have to do is have a conversation with the principal, have a conversation with the teachers, especially if your child has health concerns, to see what can be arranged. And so what I would want to suggest to the ministry is that you are probably dealing with now some of those parents who probably did not get a hat and who thought that homeschooling was what they wanted to do, and now they are trying to get back into the system. So it's not that they were really homeschoolers and homeschooling failed them and they weren't doing it right. So that is something I think maybe you can look at, that why are there parents who want to get their children back into school? Because there were parents who asked us that. Can you help us, keep our children safe and then help us get them back into school? And we said, no, we can't do that, right? So that's one thing to consider. So that being said now, if the policy emerged out of that circumstance, then it wouldn't have really been a policy to address homeschooling. It would have been dealing with something else, right? In terms of sort of like its essence and philosophy. Trying to contain something that was happening. Because there were many persons before homeschooling for strongly philosophical reasons, and they could tell you exactly why they were homeschooling and the long haul, okay? And so what I think we would want the policy to reflect would be what is homeschooling. And so the policy does not reflect that. It does not reflect the diversity that homeschooling allows for, or exactly what you spoke about, Minister. I'm not sure if it was the Minister, but somebody spoke about the evolution. Homeschooling and what we are able to do as parents is actually revolutionary. Because if you want to see change, and many people would have said it, if you want to see change in this society, you need to get to the home. You need to get to parents. Social workers are running down parents because they can't find them. Homeschoolers, the majority of them are people who have divested interest in their children and they want the best for them. And where HAT is concerned, the executive of HAT has expertise not just in homeschooling but education as well. And so we are serving our country by taking our expertise and guiding parents. So we take what we do very seriously, okay? And so what we would want to suggest, and we're very happy, is that we continue to enter talks so that the policy could really reflect what homeschooling is, and it can serve the needs of our diverse population, and it could actually reflect more accurately, I think, what the ministry wants to achieve with the overall education policy. Because I think the homeschooling policy is the one sub-policy that is out of sync with the wider policy. Because it's not relevant, it's not equitable. The way that it speaks about parents having to be approved for homeschool and their children being taken from them and put back into school if they're deemed inadequate. It doesn't mention how can special needs parents opt out. Many special needs parents are extremely cautious, and they're very challenged by this. There's no mention of gifted children in the policy. And so I think us working together and understanding how as the minister said, we can really do this and it's not cast in stone. I think that we can come up with something that can be really implementable. In its current state, the policy is not implementable because the resources that will be needed for the testing every year and putting children back into school and taking them back out and approving every year and the standardized testing. Because there are many parents, the children will not pass the test. The standardized Ministry of Education test, because homeschooling is not public school at home. It's different. And so there are parents who, they have their goals. Their children may want to go abroad. They are not going to be following the ministry's curriculum hard and fast. So those children will not pass those tests because the curricula that they use are preparing them for goals, yes? Okay. So, yes, so we work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
The views of HAT are noted, as I said from the start. The views of HAT are noted, and I want to say that we see those types of parents that you have described who were using homeschooling as an interim. We also see a good deal of parents who, for financial reasons now, are forced to send their children back out to school because their situations have changed, not just from COVID, but other things. And we also see parents who may have been committed, but they want to now get their children into the system. So some parents may want to homeschool for primary school, but they want to come into secondary school.
Correct.
And so when we have to consider the whole gamut, the policy has to deal with all of that. Because when we have children whose parents are trying to get them into the system now, and they are not at the level that the parents expect they should be for their age, then they begin to blame the ministry and say that we did not give them the kind of guidance that they required to be able to. So we see a gamut, which is why the policy needs to be broad, and which is why we are happy to re-engage HATS, because we want something that suits the wider circle, but suits Trinidad and Tobago. Right? So we're happy for all of this going forward.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Thank you very much, stakeholders, for your input in tonight's conversation. We look forward to a continued dialogue as we move forward with the education system, all in the interest and benefit of our students. Tomorrow we engage with the online conversation, and on Friday we treat with our pupils. So, Madam Minister, your closing remarks, please.
I just want to thank everyone for coming, who attended, those who are listening and viewing, and I want to encourage us that we are working together collaboratively to transform our education sector and, by extension, transform Trinidad and Tobago. We certainly cannot do it alone at the Ministry of Education. We need all hands on deck. As we always say, education takes a village. It is everyone's business. So let's continue to work together. We will do our part, and once we all do our parts, we will reach our stated goal over time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. We cannot underscore the importance of the conversation, and I want to encourage you to, yes, go on the policy. We know it's 130 pages. The communications department is working to break down each section in bite-sized pieces so that it's easily digestible. But we wanted to make sure we put everything out in black and white so we can start the conversation on the right foot. We will take all the comments on board. Persons who weren't able to give their comments or they have questions to ask, we do have a table in the back where you can fill out a form, leave your contact information. And believe me, the team that's working here, tomorrow morning they will be looking on our email, on the email for the policy and on the social media page, because as I said to Minister, 80% of our time in the office is spent on community management in responding to you. So we encourage you to continue sending your questions. As our moderator indicated, the edUTalk series continues. You can log on tomorrow. The Facebook page does have the link for you to register to participate. On Friday, we meet with 400 students. And persons, of course, are invited to keep following us on social media for updates and the opportunity to continue the conversation. This evening would not have been possible if we did not have the Honorable Minister insisting that this is to happen, and the panel agreeing in their lovely turn-up t-shirts. Please give them a round of applause. I did get some resistance Turn Up was one of the projects we implemented during the Vacation Revision Program in asking students and parents and teachers to turn up for education, turn up for the students. Of course, we want to thank our moderator, Chris Metivier. Please give him a round of applause. Our principal of El Dorado Best, Miss Anne-Marie Prasad Singh. I think she did an absolute wonderful job. I will tell you, we came this evening and the chairs were put out. You know by whom? The students came and they helped the principal put the chairs out for us this afternoon. So I want to thank you, Madam Principal. Thank you very much for your support and in allowing us to use the facility. I want to thank you, the audience, those of us present here today, those of you present here today, those of you following on TTT in the live broadcast, as well as on our Facebook page and TTT Live Online. We are monitoring your comments and we will be following up and responding to all your comments. These same people on the panel will get the questions and we demand answers within 24 hours. So we expect that we'll be able to answer your questions over the next 48 hours. TTT has been a partner with us over the last 2 days and I want to thank them for their continued support. Our suppliers who worked with us this afternoon, we knew it was going to be a little hot, so we brought some fans in, and for the lights and the plants and everything that you see here, we want to thank our suppliers. And of course, Signing Services by Caribbean Sign Language Center. Please give them a round of applause. Education is everyone's business, and I encourage you to keep making it your business. All the best for the rest of the evening. Please reach home safe. Good evening.